What I want to talk about is the Black Lives Matter protests and what's likely to happen. My view is they're probably going to get a lot worse if, as I expect, this cop, Derek Chauvin, gets acquitted. Now, everyone is trying to jettison this guy and to scapegoat him and say he's a cold-blooded murderer. I don't know one black person in this country who has got up to say that there's anything wrong with those BLM protests. In the States, I know a tiny number of black people who are condemning the rioting in any way at all. Maybe, perhaps the odd black police chief, but very few black intellectuals seem to me to be coming up and condemning it. But very few people in general, or everyone, even the people who are condemning it, they are at pains to say that the policeman, Derek Chauvin, or ex-policeman, was a terrible fella and he committed a murder, he did a terrible thing. So in the States you have Candace Owens. She's often seen as a conservative black woman, and she thinks he's a bad guy. She thinks he did a terrible thing. She called him, quotes, a devil. Then also you get Douglas Murray. He's often seen as a conservative thinker over here. I'd say he's milk and water, middle of the roading civic nationalist, gurning away. And he referred to Derek Chauvin as, quotes, a rogue cop who did something appalling and utterly reprehensible and is responsible for this, i.e. the BLM riots, starting. Victor David Hanson, he's seen as a hard, rigorous right-wing historian in the States, and he came out saying this was atrocious behaviour by a particular cop. None of these people attempt to explain why. None of them attempt to justify, substantiate their words, because in my view, they can't. Now, what they want to believe, or civic nationalists in general, seem to want to believe that if we all sing the national anthem a bit louder, pull our socks up a bit higher, and all think individualistically like they do, then everything will be all right. None of that is going to happen. It's fantasy, it's pie in the sky. So they then have to tailor reality to suit their prejudices, and that's what they're doing. Now, what I want to look at is I want to look at reality here, and I want to look at three things. Firstly, what I want to look at is whether there is an epidemic, a pandemic of cops killing black people. Secondly, whether this policeman is likely to be convicted of George Floyd's murder. And third, what is likely to happen if this cop is acquitted. Now, firstly, are there a load of white cops out there going out trigger happy shooting black men? I think that is unlikely. I think the evidence shows that is not the case. Now, I refer to three pieces of evidence here, or three articles, three collections of evidence that I want to go through. The first is an article by Theodore Dalrymple that appeared to take its evidence from the Washington Post's police shootings database. And now, what Theodore Dalrymple quotes here is, the data that he quotes, is that in 2019, 1,004 people were shot by police. 23% of those were black. Black people make up 13% of the population, but commit 53% of homicides. So it seems like the police, if you go on how likely a policeman is to arrest a black man for a serious crime, homicide is a serious crime, 53% committed by black Americans, but only 23% of police shooting, people being killed by police, being shot dead by police, only 23% of those are black. And in 2019, the police shot dead 28 unarmed civilians. 19 of those people were white and 9 of them were black. And a black man is apparently 700 times likelier to be murdered by a fellow black man than that. And a policeman is 18 times likelier to be killed by a black man than a black man is to be killed by a policeman. So those are the facts from that one article. Now, the second bit of data I want to refer to is a Harvard University study of 2017. And that looked at That was pretty intense. That survey looked at an awful lot of evidence, and it gathered a lot of data, and also it controlled for a lot of different characteristics. And the carry-home quote from their study, which is called An Empirical Analysis of Race Differences in Police Use of Force. I'll leave links to all of these down below. I won't put them on the screen, but I'll just put the links down below. That said that including all controls available from the taser sample, Table 4 shows that black civilians are 30.7% less likely to be shot with a pistol rather than a taser relative to non-black suspects. And controlling for all characteristics from incident reports, black suspects are 24.2% less likely to be shot than non-black suspects. So when you control for everything, all the characteristics, when you're really rigorous about it, what you find is that black people are 24.2% less likely to be shot by police than non-black suspects. Now, the third bit of evidence is a front page article that's called The Truth About Interracial Violent Crime. Now, that took its data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Now, what that found was that in 2018 there were nearly 600,000 interracial violent victimizations, excluding homicide, between blacks and whites in America, and blacks committed 537,000 of those. So 537,000 of 600,000 were committed by blacks on whites, or 90.4%, while whites committed 56,000 of them, or 9.5%. And that article also found that when white offenders committed crimes of violence against either whites or blacks in 2018, they targeted white victims 97.3% of the time, and they went after black victims 2.6% of the time. By contrast, when black offenders committed crimes of violence against either whites or blacks during that year, they targeted white victims 58% of the time, and they went after black victims 42% of the time. So what that looks like is black people committing a lot of crimes of violence against white people disproportionately, and white people not committing crimes against black people. So much for the pandemic of racist killings that we keep hearing about. Now, what about this particular case, this cop, Derek Chauvin? The available evidence suggests two things. Firstly, he did not kill George Floyd. Secondly, he didn't intend to kill him. And I don't know how you get a conviction out of that. Now, the preliminary autopsy that was conducted on George Floyd did not find evidence of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation, and said that Floyd may have died from being restrained and from underlying health conditions, as well as, quotes, any potential intoxicants. And then a week later, what you had was the Fuller report. I think this is after the lawyers and the PR guys had got to it. They said that there was evidence of homicide, but they didn't explain why they thought that. Now, the potential intoxicants in his system were fentanyl, cannabinoids, and amphetamines, recent use of amphetamines. Now, if Floyd didn't die of traumatic asphyxiation, i.e. from being strangled, it's very difficult to see how he can be guilty of murder. But it is easy to see how he could have killed himself through drug use. Now, if we look at fentanyl, that's the first one. The UK's Talk to Frank Drugs website says that one of the risks of fentanyl is, quotes, suppression of normal breathing, including respiratory arrest, i.e. when you stop breathing altogether. And that's what George Floyd died of. He stopped breathing and died. So it's not because he was strangled, he stopped breathing. Now, the UK's DrugWise website says of fentanyl is approximately 50 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine, 100 times. As little as 0.002 grams of fentanyl is potentially fatal. High potency of fentanyl greatly increases the risk of overdose. And the DrugWise website also says that the dangers of fentanyl, even in small quantities, should be brought to the attention of the court when there are drugs prosecutions. So it's an extremely strong drug that will stop you breathing. And Floyd was found to have a level in his blood that could be fatal. It was a potentially fatal dose. The levels were fatal. So it's quite easy to see how he might have died of fentanyl. What else did he have in his system? Well, methamphetamine. Now the post-mortem said that he had it in his system, and it seemed to have been recent use of methamphetamine. And shortly before he died, there's a porn movie that he made. You can see snippets of it online. I don't recommend it. But in it, he's sniffing from a little bottle. I reckon that's methamphetamine that he's snorting from. And again, the UK's Talk to Frank website, that says that methamphetamine poses dangers such as increased heart rate and blood pressure, raising the risk of heart attack. The higher the dose, the greater these effects. And also, methamphetamine can reduce your appetite and make you feel exhilarated, alert, awake, agitated, paranoid, confused, aggressive, and aroused. Now, the UK's DrugWise website, what that says is that, as with all amphetamines, methamphetamine makes users feel alert, energetic, confident, powerful. Being a stimulant, use of the drug also leads to an increased heart rate and blood pressure, which raises the risk of heart problems, including heart attacks. Taking higher doses leads to greater risks. So the use of the drug is also associated with violent and aggressive behavior and acquisitive crime. I'll say that again. It is associated with violent and aggressive behavior and acquisitive crime, which George Floyd showed on the night that he died. Now, the CCTV footage of him being arrested shows him dropping a small little bag of white powder. I reckon that was methamphetamine. He dropped it out of his left hand to try and get rid of it so the police don't discover it when he's being arrested. He also had a very weak heart. What the coroner's report says is that he had 75% proximal and 75% mid narrowing of the left anterior descending coronary artery and 90% proximal narrowing of the right coronary artery. So that is a very weak heart, 90% proximal narrowing of the right coronary artery. And you've taken methamphetamine, which increases heart rate and can lead to heart attacks. Now, what you appear to have is the first doctor saying that Chauvin's knee didn't strangle Floyd, it didn't kill Floyd. And then when the lawyers get to it, or the PR guys get to it, they say, well, maybe it was homicide. Well, how could it have been? It seems to me that if there's no evidence of strangulation, then putting the knee on Floyd's neck would seem to have been the way that might have caused death is through shock, through the trauma of having your neck knelt on. And that might be one way of saying that it's homicide. I'm not sure how you could say it's then murder, but you might be able to say that it's manslaughter. I would expect a good lawyer, if he has a good lawyer, and I'm not optimistic about that, but I would expect Chauvin's lawyer to dig into the detail of that coroner's report and to work out why in the second version, the fuller version, they said they thought it was homicide without substantiating that. Now, is kneeling on the neck, is that deadly force? Well, neck restraint is listed in the Minneapolis Police Training Manual as a non-deadly force option, i.e. you can use it without danger of killing someone. It's not a chokehold, so you're not choking the throat, you're kneeling on the side of the neck. And if someone's been trained, then you can use it to control a suspect or to render a person unconscious. Now, kneeling on the neck has been used by a lot of countries, Canada, France and Spain, and there was a study which showed that since 2015 it had been used more than 200 times in Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis alone, and no one had died. So it was in the Minneapolis Police Training Manual as a legitimate hold if you needed to control someone. Use of what that Minneapolis training manual said is use of neck restraints and chokeholds. Neck restraints, non-deadly force option, defined as compressing one or both sides of a person's neck with an arm or leg without applying direct pressure to the trachea or airway. So only sworn employees who have received training from the MPD training unit are authorised to use such neck restraints, which Derek Chauvin would have been authorised. He would have been he was a trained officer. So, and there are two types. They say there's conscious neck restraint and unconscious neck restraint. Conscious neck restraint, the subject is placed in a neck restraint with intent to control and not to render the subject unconscious by only applying light to moderate pressure. Then unconscious neck restraint, the subject is placed in a neck restraint with the intention of rendering the person unconscious by applying adequate pressure. So, could you say, well, the force that was used, it was too much, it was more than was necessary, it was done sadistically? Well, it's difficult to, I'm not sure how that squares with the fact that very early on in this arrest, Chauvin and his colleagues called the emergency medical service. They saw they've got someone here, George Floyd. He's acting very agitated. He's obviously high. The phone call from the shop that reported him said that he was high. He was not acting right. He seemed very drunk, and so they call the emergency medical service. That seems to be evidence that they didn't intend for this person, George Floyd, to die. Now, what about George Floyd himself? They would have known that he was a very violent, heavy drug-using criminal. He'd been to jail 5 times, including mainly for drug crimes, but also for gun crime. He was the ringleader of a home invasion gang who knocked on a black lady's door. She was pregnant. They forced their way in, and then George Floyd holds a gun to her pregnant stomach, threatening to shoot her and her unborn baby if she doesn't tell them where the money's hidden. Now, they don't find any money, but they take some jewellery and a cell phone, and then he goes to prison for that. The police would have known about that, almost certainly, if they ran his name or if they ran his number plate details. Now, in addition to that, Floyd was resisting the police. They took him out of his car, put him in a police car, then they tried to take him out of the police car, and that's when he was trying to fight with them. He was resisting with them. And then when they get him out of the police car, he falls on the ground and says he can't move. And then after that, he says he can't get back into the back of a police car because he's claustrophobic. And for the fact that he'd driven to the site when he was before he was arrested, and he'd been sitting inside a police car before then, seems to suggest that was a lie. He's lying to the police, and he was committing crimes at the time. He was in possession of drugs. He drove to the place high, and he was reported by the shop where he tried to exchange a forged $20 bill for cigarettes. It was reported that $20 bill, the ink on that forged bill, was still wet. So he's in the process of committing crimes. They want to control this guy. He is big as well, 6'6", with a violent history, a big guy. They need to control him. Given what the police training manual says, I don't know how you convince a jury that it was murderous or a crime to put the knee on his neck. Now, the call, the 911 call at the time was pretty clear about what state he was in. It's not just police observation. The police call said when the shop telephoned the police because George Floyd had bought cigarettes with a forged bill. They realise it was a forged $20 note. They go out to him and say, just give us back the cigarettes and go home. He says, no, I'm keeping these cigarettes. So they then call the police. Someone comes to our store and gives us fake bills, and we realise it before he left the store. He was also drunk and everything. He is awfully drunk and he's not in control of himself. So he's a tall guy. He's like tall and bald, about like 6 or 6.5. So a big, violent man, big enough to create problems. Now, this would seem to be the kind of suspect for whom the neck restraint was intended. It would seem to me that's the kind of person that the people who drafted that police training manual. And that police training manual, the net restraints part of it, the net restraints bit of it, seems to have been revised 4 times, so subject to 4 revisions: 2002, 2007, 2010 and 2012. Again, I'll put the link below, but it would seem to me that that was drafted with people like George Floyd in mind. Now, I don't know how a prosecutor can prove that it was unreasonable to put him into a net restraint. Now, even if there is a show trial, which I expect there will be, the reason I expect that is because America likes fair trials. America believes in fair trials up to a point. And that point is when a crime or an allegation reaches, really excites the public, and there is a public demand for someone to be punished, someone to be convicted and punished, then the authorities will tend to see fair trial, due process and the presumption of innocence as bureaucratic technicalities that get in the way, something to be bulldozed out of the way. So the more serious it is, the stronger the public feeling, the less there is a belief in fair trials in the States. And we've seen that. I think Harvey Weinstein, horrible, horrible individual, but I don't think his trial was fair. I don't think he could have had a fair trial, given the publicity. Another fellow called Larry Nassar committed horrible crimes against young girls on the American gymnastics team, but his sentencing turned into, it lasted a week. It lasted, I think, the best part of a week, with a lot of victim statements being read out. It looked a little bit like a media circus there, and I think we're going to get a similar situation here. The reason I think that is because Derek Chauvin has been investigated and is now being prosecuted for tax evasion. When you see a tax investigation in America, that is a sign that the authorities want to get you. So if you ever see someone getting their taxes, or a politician getting their taxes investigated, that's probably the reason that's behind it. I think it started off, it really got going under George W. Bush, and then Obama made even bigger use of it, just basically harassing think tanks, conservative think tanks, in order to drive them under. And then it doesn't seem to be used so much by Trump, so far as I'm aware, but it was used against this cop. Now, if you get a show trial is difficult to manage. It is difficult to handle. You have to, and the reason is conspiracies are hard to handle. Officials are incompetent, and people will not keep their mouths shut. It is difficult to run a show trial effectively. I think a show trial will fail. I don't think that the prosecutors will be able to convince at least 10 people on a jury of 12 beyond reasonable doubt that there was George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin, as opposed to being killed by the cocktail of drugs and having a weak heart. And I don't think they'll be able to persuade a jury of at least 10 people on a jury of 12 beyond reasonable doubt that that police officer Derek Chauvin intended to kill or intended to commit some kind of crime. I don't know how that's possible. I am not a criminal lawyer, but I think even I could get Derek Chauvin off, given the evidence surrounding the case. So if he has, it's not so much legal skill that's required, it is tenacity and backbone from his lawyers. If his lawyers have that, I don't see how he is going to be convicted. So what happens if he's acquitted? There's one more thing, which is that in the States, the defence have much greater leeway to challenge jurors, to get rid of jurors they don't like. And that means that what's quite common in cases like this is for defence lawyers to try to get as many people on the jury as they can who may be related to policemen or be servicemen and women, or related to servicemen and women themselves. And the leeway to challenge jurors means you can pack the jury a bit with people who are going to be sympathetic to your case. So I think it's going to be difficult, to prevent at least 3 people on that jury saying, no, we don't believe he was guilty beyond reasonable doubt. Then I think he'll get acquitted. Now that trial is set for March 2021, so about 8 months' time. Now, if it sticks to that timetable by about, I would have thought within about 10 months' time, we'll have a verdict. And I think Chauvin will be acquitted. What is likely to happen then? Well, what I'd like to look at is the results of the Rodney King riots in 1992 in Los Angeles. That's where Rodney King was beaten by policemen, and he survived. His life wasn't in danger. I think he had very severe bruising. I think he might have had a broken cheekbone. It was not what he suffered was it was a very unpleasant beating, but nothing. He didn't die, and the response to that beating didn't create riots. The riots then were in response to the policeman being acquitted. Now, what the results of those riots was 63 deaths and 2,383 injuries. I would expect the riots, if Derek Chauvin is acquitted, to be at least twice as bad. I would expect at least 100 people to be killed and at least 5,000 people to be injured. I would expect the violence to be exported across the Atlantic. So that in the same way that the looting after George Floyd's death was exported into Europe, to Britain and into France and Belgium, I would expect the killing that will respond, or the violence that will happen as a result of Derek Chauvin's acquittal. If he's acquitted, I would expect that to come over the Atlantic as well, and that is going to be a very ugly situation. And I think that will intensify the one message which everyone, it seems, Antifa, BLM, to Mayor Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, President Trump, and people like Douglas Murray or Candace Owens, the one thing they do not want to face up to is that there is an unbridgeable ethnic and racial divide in America that has to be faced up to. They will not face up to it. Instead, they prefer temporarily to deny reality, to ignore reality. Now, you can ignore reality, but reality doesn't ignore you. And I think that is what we're going to find during this trial, which is due to take place in March of next year.